Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into FICA in South Africa, especially what it means for real estate agents. We're going off of some notes you sent and a training session transcript, and it looks like this trainer, Cameron Jansen, really knows how to make this stuff interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He uses these amazing real-world stories, even throws in a little bit of humor, to really get the point across.
Yeah, I was reading through that transcript and it was like, wow, this is not your typical boring legal stuff.
Not at all.
So let's get started with the basics. What is FICA exactly, and why should a real estate agent like myself care?
Right, so FICA stands for the Financial Intelligence Center Act. It's the South African law that's there to fight against financial crimes, things like money laundering, terrorist financing, that sort of thing.
Okay, so the serious stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just something that's happening, in some dark corner somewhere. This can actually be happening right in front of us in the real estate market.
Wait, so you're saying like houses and apartments, those can be used for money laundering and terrorist financing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When you think about it, property is a really valuable asset, right? It's relatively easy to buy and sell, and often there's lots of cash flying around.
Makes sense.
So it's a prime target for criminals who are trying to clean dirty money or funnel funds to, illegal activities.
Yeah, okay, that's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
So how does FICA actually work in practice? What does it require me as an agent to actually do?
Well, Jansen really stresses that it's more than just like collecting your client's ID and calling it a day.
Right.
It's really about verification. You have to dig a little deeper, make sure that the information you have is actually accurate and that there aren't any, red flags popping up.
Okay.
He tells this story about a bank teller who was just slammed, it was a Saturday morning, super busy, and he accidentally approved this transaction that turned out to be fraudulent. It's like a cautionary tale. It shows just how easy it can be to miss something important when you're not paying close attention.
Oh, wow. So even when things seem totally normal, I really need to make sure I'm checking everything carefully.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And Jansen actually introduces this idea of enhanced due diligence. It's like going above and beyond those basic checks, like maybe doing a quick Google search on your client, checking your social media profiles, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
You'd be surprised what you can find with a little, online sleuthing.
Right. Okay, so what sorts of red flags should I be keeping an eye out for?
Well, Jansen talks about these suspicious transactions, things that just, kind of raise your eyebrows a bit.
Okay.
Like, imagine you have a tenant who wants to pay a whole year's rent up front, and they want to do it all in cash.
Oh, wow.
It might sound amazing at first.
Yeah, like a dream come true.
But it could actually be a sign that something shady is going on.
Okay, so like 400,000 Rand in cash, that would definitely make me a little nervous. But wouldn't that just be a good deal for me as an agent?
Well, yeah, it might seem that way on the surface, but you have to remember you're not just a salesperson, you're also kind of like a gatekeeper, right? You're helping to prevent financial crime. Reporting a suspicious transaction doesn't mean you're saying someone's guilty, it just means you're flagging a potential issue for the authorities to check out.
Right. Better to be safe than sorry, I guess. And speaking of being safe, it sounds like South Africa being gray-listed makes all of this even more important. What does that even mean exactly?
So being gray-listed means that basically the international community has kind of flagged South Africa. They're saying, hey, there might be some weaknesses in your system for stopping money laundering and terrorist financing, and it can have some pretty big consequences for the country's economy,
Oh, wow.
Jansen argues that it's put a lot of pressure on industries like real estate to really step up their FICA game.
So how has the gray listing actually changed things for real estate agents? Like, what's different now?
It's definitely led to more scrutiny, for sure, and they're enforcing the FICA regulations more strictly across the board. So real estate agents really need to be extra careful, make sure they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's, following all the rules.
Right. Now, Jansen also mentioned this story about a cash buyer in Sandton, right?
Oh, yes. About a decade ago, his company sold a property for a whopping 17 million Rand, all in cash.
Wow.
At the time, everything checked out with the buyer's FICA paperwork, so the transaction went through. But Jansen admits that with the stricter rules they have in place today, that same transaction would definitely be reported to the Financial Intelligence Center, no question.
Wow. So FICA is like constantly evolving then.
Exactly.
That's kind of intimidating, to be honest. What else should I be aware of as a real estate agent?
Well, there's definitely a lot more to cover. Jansen gets into things like politically exposed persons, those are PIPs, and the importance of client anonymity and even how to handle those tough situations where clients just refuse to give you their FICA documentation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those PAPs, those politically exposed persons. You might think it's just like presidents and royalty and stuff, but it's actually way broader than that.
Yeah, I've always been a little unclear on that. Who exactly counts as a PP?
Well, Jansen explains that it includes anyone who has a prominent public function, you know?
Okay.
So thing like government ministers, judges, high-ranking military officials,
Right.
even people like executives at state-owned companies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you could be dealing with a PP without even realizing it.
So like if I'm working with someone who works for the local municipality,
Hmm.
they could potentially be a PP.
It's possible. Yeah, it all comes down to their specific role and their connections, you know? Jansen points out that not every single person who works for the government is automatically a PP. He gives a few examples, like President Ramaphosa's children would be considered PEPs,
Right.
the UK Prime Minister, obviously,
Right.
even a member of, like, the Swazi royalty.
Gotcha. Okay, so this could get pretty complicated.
Yeah.
What about client anonymity? So can a buyer stay anonymous from the seller during a transaction?
Ooh, this is where it gets interesting. So Jansen says that the seller doesn't actually need to know the buyer's identity, but you, as the real estate agent, you absolutely have to know.
Right.
He uses this funny example of Brad Pitt buying a property, right?
Okay.
So Brad Pitt could stay anonymous from the seller, but you'd still have to get all of his FICA information.
So I'm like the secret keeper in the background, making sure everything's on the up and up.
Exactly. It's this delicate balance, right? You've got to respect your client's privacy, but at the same time, you've got these legal obligations under FICA.
Right, of course. And speaking of legal obligations, what happens if a client just flat out refuses to give me their FICA documents?
Oh.
I imagine that could get pretty awkward.
It definitely can. But Jansen actually has some really good advice for handling those tricky situations. He basically encourages agents to be firm, but also respectful at the same time.
Right.
He says it's not about being suspicious of the client, it's about following the law and doing your part to prevent financial crime.
Right. It's making sure they understand that we're all on the same side here.
Exactly. And he really emphasizes the importance of knowing your company's specific risk management and compliance program, like inside and out.
Why is that so important? Isn't FICA just kind of a standard set of rules?
It is, but companies can have their own internal policies and procedures, you know, and their own thresholds for when they have to report suspicious activity.
Okay.
Like, for example, Jansen Company has this blanket rule that any property transaction over 15 million rand, they report it no matter what.
Wow. So even if the buyer seems totally legit and has all their documents in order, if they're spending 15 million rand or more, it's automatically reported.
Yep, that's just how they operate. It's like a proactive way to manage risk, especially with South Africa being gray listed. They're not messing around.
Right. Definitely makes sense. Okay, so I'm really seeing how all of this ties together now. Are there any other big takeaways from Jansen's training that we should touch on?
One thing he really hammered home was this idea of kipping off. It's basically when you warn a client that they're being reported to the FIC.
Oh, okay. So no dropping hints that I'm about to file a report.
Nope, not at all. That's a huge no-no. It can actually have some serious legal consequences for you and your company.
Yikes.
Yeah. Jansen suggests just redirecting clients to the FIC handbook if they have any questions. That way you're not giving legal advice, you're just pointing them to the official source.
That's smart.
Mm.
Keeps things nice and professional, avoids any confusion.
Exactly. What about specific reporting requirements? Like, what are the things that would legally require me to file a report?
Right. Yeah.
One of the biggest ones is cash transactions. If a client wants to pay like a deposit or rent in cash and it's over 50,000 rand, you have to report it.
50,000 rand. That seems like a pretty low threshold, honestly.
It might seem that way, yeah, but it's all part of this big push to crack down on money laundering.
Okay.
Jansen actually mentioned that the threshold used to be even lower. It was just 24,999 rand.
Wow, really tightening the screws.
Yeah. Now, what if a client, tries to be sneaky and they make multiple cash payments, each under the limit, but the total adds up to way more than 50,000 rand?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, what if they're trying to get around the rules?
Jansen addressed that too. The FIC is definitely on the lookout for patterns like that. People trying to avoid the reporting requirements. Breaking up a big cash payment like that wouldn't work. It would still get flagged as suspicious activity.
Okay, so no clever accounting tricks.
Nope, not going to fly.
Yeah.
What about other lead flags that agents should be looking out for?
Yeah, good question.
Well, Jansen really emphasized the importance of knowing where the money's coming from. especially for those big transactions. If a client can't or won't give you clear, verifiable information about their funds, that's a huge red flag.
So basically, if my gut is telling me that something feels off, it's better to be safe than sorry and just report it.
Absolutely. And document your reasoning for reporting it, even if it turns out to be nothing. It shows that you're taking compliance seriously and it protects you in the long run.
Good point. This is all starting to feel a bit like a minefield, to be honest.
They can be, yeah.
Any advice on how to navigate these tricky situations with clients while still making sure I'm following the rules? It could be a little nerve-wracking, to have those tough conversations with clients about FICA,
Oh, for sure.
especially when you're worried about, like, jeopardizing the deal.
Yeah.
What does Jansen say about handling those kinds of situations?
Well, he really stresses the importance of empathy. He reminds agents that clients might be feeling frustrated or even confused by FICA, especially if they've had different experiences in the past, maybe with other agents or in other situations.
So it's not always about them trying to hide something. It could be that they just genuinely don't get it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where, clear communication is so important. He suggests starting by explaining why FICA is necessary in the first place. Emphasize that it's a legal requirement. It's not just you being like personally suspicious of them.
Right, right.
It's about making them feel like you're both on the same team here.
We're partners in this, not like enemies or something.
Exactly. You can even frame it as, a shared responsibility, like you're both working together to protect each other from potential problems down the line.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Are there any other communication tips that he suggests?
Yeah, he also recommends like highlighting the bigger picture. Explain how FICA actually helps combat financial crime and protect the integrity of the whole real estate industry.
So connecting it back to that larger purpose.
Exactly. And even when you encounter resistance, he says to be patient and persistent. Maybe offer additional resources, like point them to the FI handbook if they have specific questions or concerns.
Okay, so that way they can see that you're, taking their concerns seriously and you're willing to go the extra mile to help them understand.
Exactly. It's all about building that trust and having a positive relationship, even when you're dealing with these, kind of sensitive topics.
Right, right. This deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered a ton of ground, from the basics of FICA all the way to these, like, really tricky client interactions.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack.
So what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think Jansen's key message is that FICA compliance is a journey, not a destination, right?
It's not just a one-time thing.
Exactly. It requires constant vigilance. You always got to be paying attention, a willingness to learn and adapt as things change, and above all, a commitment to ethical conduct.
Doing things the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are resources out there to help you, like the FIC handbook, your company's compliance officer, even industry organizations that can offer support and guidance along the way.
Right, you don't have to figure it all out on your own.
Not at all. FICA might seem daunting at first, but with the right knowledge and the right approach, it can become just a normal part of your professional practice.
Yeah, it just becomes part of how you do business.
Exactly.
So to everyone listening, as you're out there navigating the exciting world of real estate, remember that FICA compliance is more than just checking a box. It's a crucial part of building a sustainable and ethical business.
And it's about protecting yourself, your clients, and the whole industry.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into FICA in South Africa. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.